Good morning from Brisbane colleagues, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. The central focus of our webinar today is modeling the infection risk from indoor exposure to SARS-CoV-2 in the air. Well, the concept of quantitative risk assessment that results or may result from airborne transmission of respiratory infections in public and residential indoor spaces is not new. In fact, the model developed by Wells and Riley for this purpose is decades old. The theories and mathematical foundations for the application of the theories, the well-known WR equation, have not been forgotten over time. And there has been a small but steady flow of research papers published in various journals applying and extending the model for various scenarios. Many of you on the call are authors or co-authors of such papers. However, it would be hard to trace the applications of such assessments in real life as tools for the mitigation of airborne respiratory infection transmission. For example, as tools to guide building design and operation to provide adequate ventilation for infection prevention, or to guide the utilization of shared indoor spaces to minimize the risk of infection. Utilization in this context means the number of people in the space or the time they spend there. The history of science provides many examples of theories or discoveries that had to wait for decades, if not centuries, before their time came to be actually applied. The COVID-19 pandemic brought into full focus the need for the actual application of the theories of risk assessment. This is no longer just a matter of scientific interest or an academic exercise. It is a necessity. In a matter of months, the development of tools for risk assessment exploded. Some of these have been already made available through publications or on websites. Some have been used, and many more are in various stages of development. Now, with the expansion of risk assessment modeling tools, this brings new questions and challenges. For example, how do we put these tools into the hands of those who need them? Or how are the users going to use them? Who in fact will be the users? And will the outcomes be applied to lower the risk of transmission? With the many tools available, a potential user will ask, how do the tools differ from one another? Which tool is the right one for my application? The rapid expansion of this field means that at the moment, we have no answers to such questions. While these tools all incorporate ventilation as a primary control measure, they differ in the inclusion of epidemiological aspects, in how emission sources are represented, and in how risk is calculated based on time-dependent exposure to infectious aerosols. They also differ in terms of their platform, target users, and overall degree of technical complexity. Hence, this our two-part webinar aims to discuss and compare the range of available tools. In other words, we intend to put all the toys on the table and play with them. We hope that by doing this, we will help potential users and in turn influence efficient and effective risk assessment and mitigation, and ultimately drive policy and regulatory change. Enjoy the webinar. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Brad Prezant, Chief Scientific Officer of VA Sciences in Melbourne, Australia, and current ISIAC Vice President for Practice. Our calculator starts with the problem of reoccupying buildings. So what I present today, our solution, was designed with both scientific principles and risk communication principles in mind, to be used by both scientists and the general public. It is therefore both a risk assessment tool and a risk communication tool. Risk communication principles are well beyond the 5 minutes I have today, but consider Dr. Peter Sandman's excellent model, risk equals hazard plus outrage. Put simply, scientists focus on the hazard and ignore the outrage, while the public does the reverse. If we wish to successfully reoccupy buildings, we need to consider public perceptions. The name of our calculator is the COVID Infection Risk Calculator. It's web-based and easy to use, and is usable across all our common devices, including smartphones. With several access levels, a sophisticated user can also create customized templates for others. It's interactive. Input parameters can be changed, and the results seen immediately on the screen. It uses the same approach as many others you'll hear about today: the compartment model to determine quanta concentration in air, and then the Wells-Riley to calculate infection risk. It does have some unique features, however, including the ability to compare results across multiple rooms simultaneously in the Compare Rooms mode, and the ability to simulate an individual accessing multiple rooms in multiple buildings or spaces, and then calculating an overall risk, such as what might occur during a visit to an airport or shopping center where you pass through a number of spaces. It considers building factors, activity factors, and some virus-specific factors, as shown. The output can be controlled as either a simple color code or with more specific infection risk estimates. Let's get started.
The solution: a quantitative risk assessment tool that uses the size of the room, the airflow, the occupant activities, and what scientists know about SARS-CoV-2 virus, allowing people to safely reoccupy buildings in a timely manner during the COVID-19 pandemic. Using the latest algorithms, this tool is powerful enough to provide a scientific estimate of the risk of infection. Simple enough to be placed in the hands of a building occupant to allow them to understand and manage their risk, reduce their anxiety, and provide the confidence needed to reoccupy their building. In short, this is a risk assessment tool, but also, and most importantly, it's a risk communication and management solution. A user begins by choosing the number of occupants and the duration spent in the selected building, and immediately sees the risk of infection for all the rooms in descending order, with the room with the least risk on top. As the number of persons increases, and the time increases, the risk increases, and the changes are shown in real time. The easy-to-interpret coloured scale bars move from green to yellow to red to indicate the risk. Are masks being used? Toggle the switch to see how this parameter affects the risk level, allowing you and your team to assess and mitigate risk prior to using a space. Advanced users, when granted access by the building definer, have the ability to modify the underlying assumptions used to calculate the risk. Are air cleaners present? How many and at what capacity? Advanced users can display the calculation fields showing the exact numbers used to calculate the results. Changing the default values to reflect any unique aspects of the occupancy makes the tool useful to even the most advanced health scientists. When defining the building and its rooms, the volume and inward airflow, when known, are entered. Default values for airflow are used when none is specified. After all the rooms are entered, the building definer chooses the bounds for the coloured bands, based on internal policies or on external guidance from public health authorities. These can be changed at any future time, based on changing guidance. All the building data is stored for future analysis. This flexible web tool operates smoothly on all platforms, so whether you're accessing from your office, your tablet, or from your phone on the go, the data you need will always be at your fingertips. The VA COVID Calculator is a risk management solution forming the core to your return to workplace strategy. By working with a program that runs on personal devices in real time, building occupants can return to their buildings with confidence in their safety.
Good morning, good day, good afternoon from Kuopio in Finland to each of you according to your time zone. The personal relative COVID risk modeling tool that I'm presenting estimates the COVID mortality risk in an indoor exposure scenario described by, and I'll share the screen with you. described by certain personal, microenvironmental, here, social, and epidemic factors. To another reference scenario. The model assumes that the effects of these 4 input factors on the risk are multiplicative, that is, doubling or zeroing any factor would double or zero the overall risk. This tool does not estimate an absolute risk. Its output values are meaningful only in relation to a specified reference. On top of the Excel sheet are brief user instructions. Below is the simple model itself with the input values in red and model calculated in the intermediate values in black. Enter data only in the red cells. To the right, you find background data and links that can be used to choose input values for the model. This is the first sheet, the general reference sheet. Its inputs now represent European population level conditions in the summer of 2020. In the model, these data produce a reference risk of 5.05 times 10 to the minus 10. This is merely a dimensionless number, numerical reference that later values are compared to. The next personal reference sheet represents my own physical, behavioral, microenvironmental, and social factors, plus the average epidemic factors in July 2020 in Finland. My age and gender increase my risk. My blood group reduces it. My big house and low occupancy and low national COVID incidence levels pull the risk downwards, and the resulting personal reference risk estimate turns out to be only 6% of the general European reference risk at the same time. The third personal case sheet, my own personal and microenvironmental factors unchanged, but I changed the social factors here to represent a family reunion, 10 times more people other than myself in the house, spreading viruses in the same volume of air and reducing the distances between us. And the epidemic factor now reflects a 44 times higher COVID incidence in November compared to July. My resulting risk is now about 2,200 times higher than in July. Because the model objective is relative, not absolute risk, its data requirements are small, and validity does not depend on many rarely measured COVID variables, such as the concentration, virulence, or exposure dose response of the SARS-CoV-2 virus in indoor air surfaces. The surprisingly big 50 times higher risk than the model predicts from 10 times higher occupancy by other people could be an overestimation though, because the model treats social distancing and air exchange per capita as independent risk factors. My guesstimate is that in real indoor settings, their sum effect would be less than multiplicative, but more than additive. Thank you very much for your time.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Livio Mazzarella and I'm going to present on the behalf of RIVA a tool developed in the framework of RIVA 19 Task Force. The tool is based on the standard airborne disease transmission Wells-Riel model, but it extends a single-room approach to a multi-room floor plan served by an HVAC system considering air flow from the HVAC to rooms and from rooms to corridor, toilets, and staircase. It's possible to partially remove the full mix hypothesis behind the well-raised model using the ventilation contaminant removal effectiveness, which depends on the chosen air distribution system. The HVAC recirculation ratio can be set from 1 full recirculation to 0 full outdoor air. The tool accounts for various losses in the HVAC system, the positioning ducts, air handling units, and so on. But the basic input assumption is that supply and return air flows must be known in each room. The main limitation is that the building floor plan is fixed in its layout up to 100 rooms, but only one corridor, one staircase, one toilet compartment. Ventilation air is supplied to rooms and eventually corridor, which is returned, and it's only eventually directly extracted to outdoor by staircase and by toilets compartments. Unbalanced high flows in each room can cause air exfiltration or air transfer to corridor and then toilets and staircase if any extraction takes place there. Biosers can be placed in any room, corridor, staircase, and toilet with its specific strength and different time schedule organized with 2 time steps. In addition to HVAC virus filtration efficiency or return air provided by a HEPA filter or another virus removal equipment, it accounts for facial mask usage through their efficiency separately for infected and susceptible people. In the output, it supported the average virus strength in quanta for each space, the individual infection risk, and the average number of potentially infected people. Further, the virus air to surface deposition is given also for the HVAC system other than the spaces. Graphic output is also available, providing daily time history for both virus concentration and deposition in each spaces. 2 histograms are available giving the individual infection risk distribution and number of potentially infected people distribution among spaces in total for the last. The tool is primarily to be used to perform sensitivity analysis with respect to different possible technical solutions as shown in this example. Here you can see how individual infection risk distribution is changing when moving from recirculation to full outdoor air on HVAC return air, just from left to right. Also, an example of the impact of facial mask wearing is given. The histogram on the left is reporting individual infection risk at 100% recirculation when all people are wearing 50% efficiency facial masks. In the histogram on the right, HVAC recirculation is instead set to 0. Conclusions. The developed tool, with some limitation, allows comparing possible improvements on both ventilation solution for new and under retrofit building or system and different operation strategy for existing systems. The tool has been developed in VBA under MSL Excel and it's simple enough to use and fast to execute, but is intended to be used by experts only, who know the meaning of each input and their implication on the result. Thank you for your attention and I'm available for any question. Bye.
Good morning and good afternoon. I am Detlef Hennings from Cologne, Germany. I will give a short introduction to an air exchange estimator for infective aerosol prevention. The motivation is to derive ventilation rules for rooms of all sizes. I'm starting from observed events and I use no knowledge about virus properties. My method is to analyze the dynamics of events. Model assumptions are: a number of persons are meeting in a room. The room is either unventilated or ventilated. One person is exhaling virus-loaded aerosol. Aerosol is spread over the whole room. If the room is not ventilated, the aerosol concentration increases linear with time. The slope of increase is inverse to the room volume. This leads to a simple linear formula. The received dose can be understood as a time integral of the concentration. Thus, the increase follows a square function, also inverse to the room volume. Looking at the time until a specific dose level is reached, for example 4 units after 2 hours, when the room is scaled down by a factor of 4, the time until the same dose is only 1 hour. The next factor 4 downscaling results in a time until the same dose of only half an hour. A generalization leads to a root of volume law. In a graph with volume on the horizontal axis and time on the vertical axis, the root of volume law defines a set of curves of equal dose. I will come back to this type of graph. Now we are looking at an example event, a choir rehearsal in a 1000 cubic meter room. The time profile is 90 minutes rehearsal work without ventilation, followed by a 15-minute break, and finally another 45 minutes without ventilation. The intensity of ventilation during the break is not known. Limiting cases are no ventilation or complete air exchange. This graph shows the no ventilation case. In the complete air exchange case, the concentration is reset during the break and restarts from 0. Looking at the dose, in the no ventilation case, the dose shows more increase in the final 45 minutes than in the initial 90 minutes. In the complete air exchange case, the dose shows a minor increase in the final 45 minutes, but on top of the dose already reached in the first 90 minutes. For comparison of unventilated and ventilated cases, the ventilated curves can be projected to the corresponding unventilated curves. In the example event, many of the attendees have been infected, but not all. This leads to the assumption that at some critical time in the later part of the rehearsal, a critical dose has been exceeded. Now we can draw the event with its room volume and the critical time assumption as a point with some error bars into the equal dose graph. Applying a similar procedure to other events gives more points with error bars or error clouds. Now a lower limiting equidose line can be drawn below all events. The range above this line can be hazardous and should be avoided in all events where people are meeting. The reliability of this result increases when more observed events are introduced. The range below the limiting line can be used to define room volume dependent air exchange intervals. The green spot marks such a recommendation for classrooms that has been released by the German Umweltbundesamt and that is in accordance with this model. Using the root of volume law, the given recommendation can be extended to other room sizes. The extension to smaller rooms shows a requirement for almost permanent air exchange when used for meetings. Lacking awareness of this risk may cause a huge number of aerosol-induced infections in small rooms. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for a very brief presentation of the RESET Index. For those who aren't familiar with RESET, it is a standard for measuring the performance of indoor spaces in continuous time. With respect to air quality, the standard requires monitors within mechanical systems for building owners and within indoor spaces for tenants. The standard is used around the world across a variety of project types. At the core of RESET is a standard for data, where we look at the elements that affect data quality, primarily monitor accuracy, location of installation, and maintenance. Now, onto the topic of the moment, estimating and controlling transmission from aerosols. Let's first acknowledge that the range of advice surrounding this topic is highly confusing and often contradictory. All of it is right, and all of it is wrong. Why? Because air quality is constantly changing and needs differ from situation to situation. As a result, a complete approach to modeling infection risk from aerosols needs two complementary parts, a predictive design tool and a responsive operational tool, with the latter being our focus. In order to achieve this, our approach has been to use scientific literature that can be applied to operational building science and map each variable to sensor data, yielding a standardized real-time score. More specifically, our approach has broken infection potential into virus health, immune system health, and dosage. To serve as an example, we'll use virus survivability and immune system health as variables, while keeping dosage constant and expressed as a factor of 1. The following slide shows the impact of humidity on the survival of the influenza virus from 3 well-known cornerstone studies. As we can see, their conclusions are all quite different. Overlaying the results yields the following graph with an average 28.8% uncertainty. Repeating the same exercise for the impact of humidity on the human immune system yields the following result. In turn, overlaying these two results gives us the following estimated infection potential, which we then overlay with research on actual infection rates from another cornerstone study. The final result shows that the trends tracks closely, with a key difference being the acuteness of the peaks and troughs. Now, turning our attention back to dosage for a moment, this variable is most commonly tracked by using CO2 as a proxy for virus particles being emitted. In this way, basic data from RESET accredited sensors deployed using a standardized method can be used to model 3 complementary indices. The Building Optimization Index considers the optimization of building systems in real time. The aerosol infection potential is slightly different in that several of the parameters are computed on a rolling average, seeing as their health impact comes from exposure over time. The Certainty Index follows the RESET ethos of transparency in the accuracy of data being communicated. Of course, real-time modeling becomes a whole lot more interesting when more real-time data is available, particularly as it relates to filtration, air cleaning rates, and particle size. Data such as fan speed and density and size of liquid aerosolized particles allow users to decouple CO2 data from calculations of risk. This further allows users to actually measure the efficacy of different filtration approaches, such as portables versus ceiling-mounted solutions. This is especially important as a maintenance tool over time, enabled with notifications when the certainty of human error starts to slip in. In the last minute or so, we've anonymized a case study that demonstrates the feedback loop created by real-time data. This first image represents an optimal office in a pre-COVID scenario, with an infection potential of 40% if all occupants are infected except for a person of study. In this figure, we turn on pandemic mode, consisting of 100% outdoor ventilation. Now, most buildings are not designed to heat, cool, and filter that much outdoor air. As a result, during winter, we find indoor temperature, humidity, and pollution levels that cripple the immune system and increase the survivability of many viruses. In this particular example, even though occupancy is down 50% and CO2 has dropped to 600 ppm, infection potential has only decreased slightly from 40 to 30%. Using the data for predictive purposes, in this case study, the operator notes that infection potential only approaches 0 when CO2 approaches 400 ppm, particles approach 0, and the air is heated and humidified to human comfort zone, necessitating enormous amounts of energy. This doesn't need to be the case. When working with data and empowering building systems to assess and respond in real time, we find that a blend of ventilation with central and hyperlocal filtration enables users to drive infection potential from aerosols down to an absolute minimum while keeping energy costs low. But the most important realization in working with real-time assessments is that air quality is ever-changing and that the blend of ventilation and filtration needs to as well. Ignoring this reality will require the industry to oversize systems and burn through a lot more energy to meet results. As a reminder, RESET is an international third-party standard. We don't make or sell solutions, rather, we work with solution providers and building operators who wish to stay on the leading edge of the industry in terms of data quality and actionability. Thank you.
The Indoor Scenario Simulator is a tool to estimate the indoor viral exposure and dose. We always exhale aerosols, little when being quiet, more when talking, even more when being loudly. These droplets consist of body liquids and can contain viruses. Now, how much virus is emitted depends not only on the amount of aerosols, but also on the viral load of the individual. So we wondered, what is the distribution of the virus emissions in the general population? For this, we did a Monte Carlo simulation. We took the variability of viral load in the population and combined it with the size distribution and the variability of aerosol emissions. We addressed sedimentation in turbulent air and addressed the differences between being quiet, soft voice, and loud voice. We realized there is a very wide range of emissions. The graph here shows you the virus emissions while speaking quietly. It's the result of 100,000 random simulations, and you can tell that the viral emission ranges over 10 orders of magnitude. We now took this source strength and fed with it a well-mixed room model. This well-mixed room model is a standard occupational hygiene model that applies mass balance for far and near field. We used a virus-emitting person as the source, and we addressed the reduction by ventilation and half-life of the virus. The user can also modify the emitter, like mask efficiency, the activity, the voice strength. He can change the receiver, such as mask efficiency, and again look at different activity. And we can also modify the room parameters. All of this is implemented as a spreadsheet tool. 4 languages are already complete, more are in progress. The tool has blue fields that the user can change and yellow fields where the user gets feedback. There is a second background sheet that contains the different constants, the different equations, and makes it quite transparent what's going on. The tool provides an exposure dose, and this is intentional. We understand the dose-response curve is subject to research, especially the dose-response relationship at low virus exposures is ongoing research. It may change over time. In addition, you have to change your risk appraisal depending on whether you are doing it for healthy or at-risk populations. When we do a sensitivity analysis of our model, we realize that the emitter strength is by far the most important factor. Speaking mode is also relevant, very relevant, depending on how much somebody speaks loudly. Mask efficiency can make a very big difference. Ventilation rate is typically only a modifier, but not sufficient in many cases to make an unsatisfactory situation into a satisfactory one. And room size is one that you need to go to very large room sizes before it really makes a difference. To explain the importance of the emitter strength, we came up with this battlefield game analogy. We basically say you are a battlefield player and you have the task to define the optimal defense strategy. And we present the people, different players that are present in the way that we see the infection risk from these people in our model. So there are these paintball kids where you have many of them, but they don't really manage to hit you unless they have direct intimate contact with you. While on the other end of this scale, there's this special ops guy, this Rambo, that manages to very quickly infect many people, be it in large rooms or being very briefly together with you. The creation of the tool was financially supported by the Swiss Secretariat of Economics, SECO, and it's available in many languages on our website, scoe.ch/tools. If you have questions, feel free to contact me.
The Safe Air Spaces Aerosol Transmission Risk Estimator was developed in collaboration between Dr. Richard Corsi, Dr. Kevin Vanden Wijmelenberg, and Human Parhaskar. Each person emits particles in a wide range of sizes, from large droplets to ultrafine particles. Large droplets fall quickly out of the air, while some fine particles can remain as aerosols and float in the air for hours. The Safe Air Spaces tool focuses on fine particles, those smaller than 5 microns, which are likely to remain in the air for long durations. The tool does not account for transmission risk from large droplets or direct contact. If an individual has a viral infection, the aerosol particles that are expelled may contain SARS-CoV-2 virions, or viral particles, and some portion of these virions may be viable or infectious. We felt there was a need for a simple-to-use but mechanistic approach to estimating aerosol transmission risk. The tool is freely available at safeairspaces.com. Enter by clicking Estimate Your Risk, read and acknowledge the terms of conditions to see the interface. We partnered with Shapediver to access their software solution in the AWS cloud. Key inputs, including the number of occupants, floor area, and ceiling height, can be input at the right. The tool begins by estimating the number of particles in a space over time with several different air exchange rates plotted. Assumptions are made about emissions from an infected individual, and these are simplified as either a high emitter or low emitter, where the low emitter is assumed to have no symptoms such as coughing. Particles are removed with increased air exchanges. For example, if windows are opened, increased airflow can remove particles from a space through a window. Similarly, if mechanical ventilation rates are increased, particles can be removed through exhaust air and through filtration. Not all rooms can increase airflow through windows or mechanical ventilation. Some spaces may need to explore the use of in-room air cleaners. This can be input as a clean air delivery rate under the filtration tab. Getting particle physics right is one thing, but calculating risk is another matter. We use the Guangzhou restaurant outbreak as a way to calibrate the risk estimation tool. The base inputs are for this outbreak. There was approximately 45% attack rate at this dining event, which has been well characterized. First, the estimated particles in the space are calculated through a series of mass balance equations, as previously noted. Next, we estimate the volume of inhaled and deposited particles to other individuals within the room, or the dose deposited into each person's respiratory system. From there, it is necessary to estimate the relationship between that dose and the likelihood of an infection, or the dose-response relationship. For this, we relied on previous dose-response research of a different coronavirus, as discussed by Dr. Haas. You can see the vertical exposure scale to the far right that there are two sets of numbers. On the left axis is the deposited particle volume per person, and on the right axis is the estimated number of viable virions, or the estimated viral dose based upon the previous dose response curve. There are some other interesting details, such as these two figures showing the particle fate location. The donut plot shows the general location of each particle at the end of the event duration. The human figure at the right shows the location of all particles within the human respiratory system in blue, and the estimated number of virions or viral particles in red. Note that each time you make a change to the inputs at the right, you must hit the apply button for that result to take effect. Here you can see we show particle reduction for the use of masks, and here the reduction from increased filtration, and finally the reduction from time and number of individuals within the room. Here you can see a summary of all inputs and the output of the risk estimation platform. By reducing the number of occupants in the space, increasing the size of the room, adding more fresh air, or applying masks, you can see the reduction in infection probability. We're currently working on updates to include a near-field multiplier, the role of humidification, and multi-zone analyses. Thanks for checking out Safe Air Spaces. Remember, wear a mask and be air aware.